All right. A long time ago, it was a very interesting time in my life, or just to clear my head. And I was in another state. I went into this one game store and found this game. Now, I was not around when this game was produced or popular as an intelligent human being. I was a kid at the time. But these kind of games used to make a very large section of the game community. And when I walked into that shop and found this old game clinking around in the used section, I was thinking, you know what? This is pretty cool. That was 2004. This game is Air War by TSR. Yes, TSR of Dungeons and Dragons fame. And it was made, I think this is the second edition. The original edition, I did not check to see what the time frame on that was. But this was made in 1983. And when I first picked this up, I was very impressed with it. I never found anybody to play the game with. But this is actually one of my favorite parts of my game collection. This box, the cover art is made by Keith Parkinson. Yes, that Keith Parkinson. You would not know by looking because it's the old school, it's a very old school like ink outline that's been painted. So it actually has a very comic book a comic book like aesthetic to it, mixed with that military aesthetic. So all in all, it comes off really cool. The box is completely black and white. There's no color in here except for on the chits. This is a hex and chit game. Technically, it's a war game. Technically, it's a board game. Back in this day, there was very little separating a war game from a board game. There were war games that used miniatures on a tabletop. But in 1983, when this was produced, miniature wargaming was pretty much historicals only at this point. Keep in mind, Warhammer did not become famous, you might say, until the late 80s. Just compare that. When this book was produced, and this box set was produced, a lot of games were produced by box sets. So this is the primary rules, and to be fair, it's stereo instructions, ages upon ages worth of 10-point font. The entire thing, I think it's like 50 pages worth? 50 pages worth of endless text. Now the endless text is not useless. I've tried to look through this and find a way to streamline it. This game has very little in the way of streamlining unless you want to lose stuff. Besides, the entire purpose, I'm going to go ahead. Air War simulates as closely as possible all of the facets of air combat that can be represented on the scale and with the system used. The basic rules and gameplay simply deal with movement and maneuvering by aircraft, as well as the use of cannon combat and the use of air-to-air missiles. The optional rules expand the game to include pilot capacity, natural phenomena, air and radar search, infrared, radar countermeasures, bombing and strafing, air-to-surface missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and AA guns. Air War is the most complete, most complex, and most realistic air game to be produced to date. These guys have complexity as one of the things they're actually pointing out. So, let me just show you this pile of stereo instructions, this endless wall of text. They do introduce you to what the chits are you'll be using during the game. And they do mention things that you see in war games, facings and whatnot. They even describe, this game does not have normal hex movement. You can point at the corner or at the flat side of the hex. And they describe in this page how to do various kinds of movement here, how to do other kinds of movement here. It also shows you a few diagrams about how to roll your plane. That's something a lot of air combat games simplify, is that turning is not about turning. Usually you have to roll your aircraft and then pull up. That's literally how it goes most of the time. Air surfaces just work that way. So, what do we have here? More stuff. Here we have the more movement, more arcs. This is the chart they have for radars. So they have two different kind of radar tracking, limited tracking. Now they have other radar arcs that you use for scanning, but one thing people usually don't know is that radar in an aircraft can be several different types. A lot of aircraft have very broad and passive scanning radars, but their targeting equipment is relatively narrow. Hence, it's still like the old dogfights. You kind of have to lock onto your target, make sure that they're in your front arc before you can, pull the trigger on that missile. Get a Fox 2 out there. assuming it's the Fox 2 you're using. They say that all the time in the Ace Combat games. You know, they say Fox 2, but they might be shooting something from underneath their, their wings. It's a radar-guided missile. What do you know? Here's the radar search arcs that I was talking about earlier on natural phenomena. This game has quite a few interesting things. They talk about pilot skill levels in a certain point. It's actually kind of funny. Somewhere over here, there are. I like the fact that for this time period, they include a list of countries and which aircraft they have. So if you don't want to play like some kind of historical scenario that happened like the Korea and Vietnam War or the Arab-Israeli War, you can literally just pick two countries, pick a time frame and say, hey, these two countries are fighting with whatever they have on tap. Yeah, you could do that with this game. One of the reasons I kind of like the idea of playing more free-for air combat games. It's something that's always been on my list of things I'd love to do, but very rarely has happened. With air combat games, and I should probably cover that in a bit here. I'm trying to find the pilot descriptions, because the pilot descriptions are hilarious. There's something about them. In this game, with the pilot ratings, you don't just have, elite veterans and conscripts or, basic trainees. They actually have a weird thing where you have normal pilots, then you have novice pilots, then you have honcho pilots. Yes, they use the term honcho. It's kind of a World War II-ism. And the funny thing is you then have below novice, you have turkeys, which is, why the hell is this guy flying an aircraft? And then you have on the other side, you have super honchos. And I'm like, super honcho? I looked at the table they had in here, and I can't find it, but the table in here has SH for super honcho. And if anybody knows anything about air warfare parlance, SH is a hilarious thing to have as an official rating in the game for the best pilots out there. So there's that. So like I said, this is a pretty straight out pamphlet of text upon text. Here's a project thing I have lost in here. This is my paper. These are cannon ratings. How these work in the game is a cannon typically has a letter rating, and you roll 2d6 on that table, which I copied here, and then you get damage based on what you roll on your 2d6 versus your letter table. This right over here is me trying to turn that into dice rolled, because I like rolling dice for damage. And if you're going to play a game where you're mostly, doing missiles and blasting each other with cannons, it might be cool to have the cannons, be something you roll damage for instead of just declare something on a chart. I kind of like that. And also, if you maybe you don't know those numbers here, maybe you do, my dice adds here try to actually exceed what we have here. Like here's a d6 plus d4 minus 1 for this chart. Well, got news. It's kind of hilarious, but that chart maxes out at 7 for damage on the one side. So, wait, let me check. I may have been misreading that. Then again, it's been like, what, a decade or more since I've looked at this chart particularly. Anyway, it comes, like it should, with a huge brick of charts. And these are the character sheets essentially for running that aircraft. They haven't been modified by me. I put these little orange bands on there. There's no way to do it. These orange bands. It's kind of a maneuverability envelope. If you read the rest of the sheet, you'll find out there's a certain speed at which you actually can still make a turn. And so I recorded in orange it doesn't matter how many, but that you can still make a turn while moving at that speed. And so the more maneuverable the aircraft, the higher the speed it can turn at. So it's mostly Cold War jets. This was made in 1983 for a game that was probably made in the late 70s. I'll be fair with you. This is most likely the oldest aircraft in here is from the Korean War, and the youngest aircraft in here is the F-16. I think the F-16 is actually called experimental in this book. The F-16 and F-18 did not enter service, I believe, until... No, it wasn't the 80s. I think they did enter service in the extremely late 70s. But it might have been the very early 80s. I should look this up. But anyway, they have the MiG-29, and here's a probable. With the MiG-29 as a probable, you're talking about they're not sure the aircraft exists yet. So the best aircraft available to the Soviets at the time of this game was the MiG-25, the MiG-27, and the MiG-23. That tells you something. There's actually a separate book for detailed rules, game charts for missiles and electronic warfare, anti-aircraft damage tables, etc. They have an additional book for scenarios. This is a paper that says it's for the aircraft and missile performance charts. I use it as a separator. This is actually, it's got the missiles in the back of it, but they have a separate character sheet for the missiles. Here we have it there. And then we have, you've already seen the sheets for the aircraft. This is the control surface. This is what you play the game with. See these? Yeah, all those numbers. This represents 4 separate aircraft, so don't die. You can run one aircraft on the top of this only. But it's a control panel, so you have an entire, larger than an 11 by 17 piece of paper to run your aircraft on. And this game is not short-sighting anybody. It comes with 4 of these. So there's plenty of aircraft to go around, from 2 to 16 aircraft per game, maximum of 8 per player. I don't think you want to go bigger than 8. The game is pretty complex. It also has micro hex maps. The hex maps in here have a compass printed on them. How cool is that? I also got someone else's chits, and they're in pretty good condition. I think I was only missing like 2 of them. They misspelled Israel. You know what? I try not to misspell things, and I usually get very mad at myself when I misspell things. But they misspelled Israel. Oh well. If you haven't seen what a chit game, chit selection looks like, I have exploding chits all over the place now. So it's just paper cardboard, and on one side you have, it's just blank cardboard. On the other side you have, look, here is a MiG-19 and an Su-15. So yay, check it out. Not being a really cool aircraft like the, oh no, here's a cooler one. The AJ-37 Viggen, one of my favorite aircraft, right there. I think there are A-10s in this game as well, but they play a minor role considering this is mostly air combat. Let me show you one last thing about this game. Back of the box. The old-fashioned TSR logo. I love that logo. It's my favorite TSR logo. And then, of course, it does mention it was made in 1983 right there. I love, I'm very bad at reading upside down, but I love the fact that it says, this is the most advanced, very high level of complexity. Playing time can be up to 6 hours. Perfectly honest, this thing could take an entire day to play, honestly speaking. Number of players, 2. It does not say 2 to 4, it says 2. So the thing is that you'd have to kind of stretch it and say, yeah, we can involve up to 4 players in this game, because we've got the boards for it. You can control up to 4 aircraft then, and that would be kind of cool. The thing is that, I guess they were expecting people to have more a war game where you fight one versus the other. Oh well. In any case, this is Air War from TSR. Have fun finding it. You can find copies of it. They're all over the place. A lot of them are damaged or used. I do think sealed copies would go for a decent amount of money, considering it's actually a TSR product. Not worked on by Gary Gygax. There's some other people at TSR that are working on it. Let me find the name rulebook again and get you the names. Damian Hausman is the guy who primarily worked on this. At the very back of the book, it has an opening page worth of talking with the player, and it says continued on page 48. So you go to the very back of the book, and there you go. You have the rest of it there in fine text. It's a good read, though. If you ever pick this up, reading the very first page and the very last page together will give you a very solid grasp of the general nuances of air combat. So here's Air War. I think it's fun. I've never played it. I have played, what games have I played? I've played Crimson Skies pretty thoroughly. I've played X-Wing pretty thoroughly. I have played a bunch of older games that they're pretty much one-off type games. They made a game called Blue Max, but I'm not too interested in World War One compared to jets. There's plenty of World War II games out there that are pretty cool, and I've played a ton of those. But when it comes down to it, I've never played Air War. It's kind of sad. I just own the box, and I've owned it for a while too. It's been 16 years. It's been 16 years in my possession. I've not played it. That's sad, but that can also change.